Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's presentation as part of the Industry Insight webinar series. The topic this time is top billing mistakes attorneys make and how to fix them. Speaking today will be Myrna Johns. The Industry Insight webinar series is hosted by the ABA Legal Technology Resource Center. To stay updated on upcoming webinars or view previous videos, visit ambar.org/industryinsight. You can also stay updated on legal technology news through our blog, www.lawtechnologytoday.org. Myrna Johns is a TABS 3 and Practice Master expert and Software Technologies primary trainer. Myrna has worked for Software Technology Incorporated, the maker of TABS 3 and Practice Master, since 1994. Throughout her career, Myrna's focus has been on helping users learn to get the most out of TABS 3. The presentation today will be followed by a Q&A. Please enter your questions into the question box in the webinar panel on the right side of your screen. All questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. We are recording this webinar, and we will be sending a video and a follow-up email in a few days. You can also keep an eye on our blog, which again is www.lawtechnologytoday.org. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll now begin the webinar.
Thank you, Rose. As a trainer for TABS 3 and Practice Master software, I'm often asked to assist firms in improving their bottom line. Today, we're going to talk about some of the mistakes that I've seen attorneys make, what the costs of those mistakes are, and how we can prevent those mistakes from occurring. I have found that the attorneys that I meet on a day-to-day basis are intelligent and hardworking individuals who put a lot of effort into avoiding mistakes in their law practice. Let's face it, no one wants to have a malpractice lawsuit against them. But malpractice mistakes are not the only mistakes to avoid. Today we're going to cover 4 billing mistakes attorneys make and how you can avoid making those mistakes, starting with the first part of the billing cycle and moving through to the end. The first mistake we're going to discuss is inaccurate timekeeping. When you guess how much time you spend on a task or which cases you were working on, you're more likely to make a mistake when entering your time. Inaccurate timekeeping can lead to missing time. Even when you have good practices in place, the best of us are going to miss some time here and there, and I'm going to show you how you can search for and find that missing time. Although I've listed it third, probably the most common situation I run into is tardy invoicing. Getting those bills out the door is the key to getting money in your pocket. And the final mistake that we're going to discuss today is avoiding your accounts receivable. Very few people like to call a client about a delinquent account. We're going to cover a few ways to help make managing those accounts receivables a little bit easier. So, as I just mentioned, inaccurate timekeeping is one of the mistakes that attorneys make. Some attorneys wait until the end of the day, the week, or the month to enter their time and have to guess about the time they enter. And I've even run into a few attorneys, just a few, who only bill their time when they start to run out of money, or so that's what it seems to their staff. Their staff is very frustrated, and that's not an effective way to run the business. So what are some ways that we can avoid making this mistake? The first way to ensure accurate time is to enter the time as you work. Think back to what you were doing on Monday at this time. Perhaps you were on the phone. If you were speaking to someone you like, such as your mother, a friend, or one of your favorite clients, you're more likely to underestimate the time that it took to complete the call. If you spent time speaking to someone annoying, such as an angry client or obnoxious salesperson, it may seem to have taken longer, and you may overestimate the time that was spent. In many instances, attorneys are going to undercut their own estimates in an attempt to avoid overcharging their clients. Entering the time as you work makes you more confident that your time is accurate. It reduces the missed time, and then most attorneys also find out that their billable hours increase when that time is entered. A recent article that I read in Solo Practice University pointed out that just waiting until the end of the day can cause attorneys to miss 10 to 15% of their billable time. So if you're only billing 4 hours a day, which who of us bills 4 hours a day, 10% of that is 4/10 of an hour. That means 4/10 of an hour each day adds up to over 100 hours a year. So what are some ways that we can accurately track our time? One way to be more accurate, use timers. In TABS 3 billing software, we have the ability to track each fee with a timer. Simply click the green arrow and the timer starts. When using that timer, we can see the increase in time and then view the value of the transaction as that work is being done. So here I can see that this 6 minutes and 58 seconds has cost my client $50. Okay? Think about your client who is concerned about the cost of their case. You have that value on the screen when they're arguing with you that they want you to take on this case that's maybe not the best task to be doing on this case. It's a very time-consuming and doesn't have a lot of value, such as trying to get a particular picture of the pet or something in a divorce case. you can point out that this call is costing them, and then fighting for something like that is going to cost them. Maybe they can get a duplicate of the picture or something like that. So, finding an easier way, having that dollar in front of you can really help a little bit with that. In Practice Master, we have another way to view timers. A lot of my clients like to see all of the tasks going on at any time and then track each of the projects they're working on so they can start and stop the timers as they go along. Even if your firm uses alternative fees, you can use the timer function as a way to keep track of the work that you do as you're doing it. Starting one timer will stop a previous timer, so if you get a phone call, you can click the phone call button. It automatically stops tracking time for what you were doing, and then you can make a quick note and then stop that timer when that's done and get right back to work. And the other benefit of having this in front of you is seeing what you were just working on if you had a distracting phone call. If this work is all listed in your client's file and you're using alternative fees, you can not only see what's been done at the case at the end of the case, but then if you need to collect those fees through the court at the end of the case, then you can collect them by simply going through and converting the time on that case. You have that listing right there to help you out. You can also find other third-party products that will work with multiple billing software packages to help you track how much time you spent on individual tasks. Another way that you can make timekeeping accurate is to use the tools that you have available. You've spent a lot of money on software, so use the features that are available in that software. There are many tools available today to make your data entry easier and more efficient. One of those tools is a macro. Like pressing a button, a macro will perform a specific step after you press it. In tab 3, for example, you can type a couple letters or a word and have that expand into words based on the macro you create. This can do two things. It can make the transaction faster to enter because you have less to type, and it helps your firm have consistent descriptions throughout the firm. So that consistency can then reduce the time that you need to spend reviewing and correcting your bills at the end of the month, because you're not going to have one paralegal typing about a meeting and another typing about a conference. They're both the same thing, so having that consistency can be helpful. For example, here in a fee entry in tabs 3, we can see the letters highlighted in blue, and that's letters TDS. When I press enter, that description will automatically change the letters TDS to the words to discuss current status and issues relating to the case. While we have that feature built in automatically to tabs 3 and Practice Master, there are also third-party apps and programs that can do something similar. Another tool that you can use to help get your time in fast and ensure that that time is accurate is converting entries to a fee. In Practice Master, here you're seeing a matter manager. You're tracking all of the work that you do. You already type a document and save it. You type out a calendar entry. You know what's on your schedule. So take that typing that you already did and use the convert to fee to convert that into a fee entry into your billing system. Firms that use Practice Master can simply click the Convert to Fee button in the Matter Manager to take that work that was completed and convert it with a single click. Since everything you do for a case is in that Matter Manager, you also identify any unconverted entries, as well as having this quick way of getting that time in. So what about when you're working with software products outside of tab 3 and Practice Master, because I'm sure you don't all use that. I know that with tab 3 and Practice Master, we have put in a toolbar, and I'm sure others do as well, where I can simply go in and click and convert those entries. So here in Word, you're seeing this Word document, and I have this PM fee button. So I'm preparing this motion. I simply click on the PM fee, and it will bill for it. Same thing goes with Outlook when I'm sending an email or receiving an email. With receiving an email, I click a button. With sending an email, I can have it automatically happen. So as soon as I send the email, I don't even have to think about it. It just pops up a window to bill for a fee. If I'm sending an email to my mother, I'm not billing for a fee, I can simply close that window and get out of it. But then I'm prompted with every email to respond to that and track that. And by the way, a lot of that missed time that attorneys find tends to be on emails. We tend to think that it only takes a minute or two to respond, when in actuality it takes 5 to 10 minutes to read, review, and prepare a good response to that email, which you're typically going to review for grammar and spellings and everything like that as well when you're done with it. And of course, in Practice Master in the calendar program, we just have a convert to fee. Here I'm using a right-click option to convert that entry to a fee. I already had to type that I had the meeting with Kelly, so just converting that to fee, I don't have to type that information over again. And then, of course, there's times when you're out of the office. Being out of the office doesn't mean that you're not working. Maybe you're at court, maybe you're meeting with a client in their office. Anytime that you're not in your office, you should be entering in your time as you perform the work. A Tabs 3 Platinum user can simply open up Tabs 3 Connect, enter a fee while at the courthouse, or before pulling out of the parking lot from that meeting at the client's office. By doing that data entry when the memory is fresh, you accurately reflect what was occurring at the time, as well as tracking the time that you spent. You're more likely to say, oh, I came into the meeting at 1 o'clock, it's 2:30, that's an hour and a half. Additionally, if you, like me, are slow when using your tablet or phone to type, my first text that I ever sent, way too recently for me to stop laughing about it here, it took me half an hour to send just a couple of lines because I was using predictive text and I didn't know that. You can use the Google Voice or whatever feature you have to turn your speech into text. I use Google Voice. I have a Galaxy S4. I click on that little microphone button when I'm in that description field, and then I simply explain what I want to type, and it will type that information out. And it's very accurate when I'm doing that. Today's speech to text has gotten a lot better, so if you've tried it in the past, you might try it again here in the future. The next mistake that I see attorneys make is not finding all of their missing time. Even with the best timekeeping practices, there are times you may slip up and miss some of the time entries that should have been made. When you review your pre-bills, pro formas, or whatever it is you call that you are going to review before you send out your bills, you may be looking for missing work on the case that you're looking on. So a lot of my clients will be looking at an individual client at a time, and they'll go through each of the clients. And that's a great way to find missing information on a client, but it doesn't talk about the work that you did that day. If you worked on a client that maybe didn't even get a bill, you aren't reflecting that. Good software like Tabs 3 will have features to help you find that missing time. The Recap of Hours report in Tabs 3 is one of my favorites. Here, if you look closely, you can see that some days have hours shaded. These days are days with a number that I specified, in this case 6 hours. Anything less than 6 hours is shaded. If my goal to get my bills out each month is 6 hours, and that's typically to bill 6 hours, you have to work 8 hours. So if you want an 8-hour workday, and I know you were laughing because lawyers don't put in 8-hour workdays, it's more like 10, 12. But if you're going to do that, you're going to typically be able to bill 6 hours of that. And so 6 hours is a very reasonable amount of time to be putting in, and you can simply look at that. That meets my goal for what I want to bill throughout the year. And when I hover over these items, you'll notice that they turn yellow. And if that yellow in Tabs 3 and Practice Master means that it's something I can drill down to. When I click on that item, it pulls up the list of items for that one day so I can find that missing time. When I look at this and I see, okay, I wrote this letter to John Williams, I might remember that I had a call come in while I was writing the letter, and then I can add that as a new entry. I can go back and track for that and remember which case that's on. So it's really going to help me to find that missing time. Another feature that we have in Practice Master software is called a visual timer display. This allows me to track all of the timer records that I have put in where I was tracking my time and look for the gaps. You can see here it's obvious where the gaps are in that particular day. What was I doing between 9:45 and 10:07? Well, I might have been up and walking around, but I also might think, oh, well, before I made this telephone call, I had another call come in. Or maybe I was preparing for this telephone conference, and so I might need to bill for that or increase that. Perhaps our attorney over lunch was rainmaking to get some new clients. You might want to note that. Or maybe attending an online class like the one today. While I'm not noting it here in my screenshots or anything like that, one of the things I encourage firms to do is to find ways to track their non-billable time. If you set up a client in your billing software and track your CLE, then at the end of the year, if you have to report that CLE, I know most states have some reporting requirements, then you have a list of the CLE that you attended, in addition to looking at this and seeing, oh, that's not missing time, that's simply non-billable time. Same thing with even personal information. You can keep that personal information on there. Just track what you were doing. Track when you were out of the office sick so that you know that, of course, I didn't put in 6 hours that day. because I only came in for an hour or two, did what was mostly critical, and then went back home to bed. Once you know that you're missing time, you can look at your calendar to see what you were doing on a specific day. I'm having a hard time talking today. And looking in your client's file to see if there was time that was not billed. For example, here you're seeing the Practice Master Matter Manager. I can see which entries are unconverted. As we showed earlier, you can click that Convert to Fee. So if I'm using that Convert to Fee to bill for these items, I can see that these items are unconverted, which means that they're there to be converted so I can bill the client for those. Again, another option might be to use third-party applications like Chrometa or iTimekeep that can track how you spent your time on your phone or how you spent your time on your computer, and then they can convert those records into fees using specific software applications that they have in there that they can do. Probably the top mistake I see is the tardy invoicing. In many firms, it's just one or two attorneys that don't have all that time in at the end of the month. Now, those attorneys are wasting their own time because they're trying to review what they did for last month and enter that time by memory. And of course, the longer you get, the more you have to strain that brain to get that time to figure out how much time you spent doing something. Also, as has been pointed out, they are probably undercutting the work that they actually did because they didn't enter that time in the first place, and they would rather underbill than overbill. Sometimes I found that the rest of the staff is ready to start billing the next month and the previous one hasn't been completed. That can cause problems when reviewing drafts for those people that are on time or when they're looking at reports. I'm sure many of you have heard of attorney Jay Foonberg. He is the author of How to Start and Build a Law Practice. And although it was written many years ago, I know they keep updating that over the years. One of the features that I liked best from his book is a feature called the Client's Curve of Gratitude, and you may have heard about it in other places, even if you haven't read the book. He researched why clients are often reluctant to pay their bills, and one of the things he found is that the further you get from the time the work was completed, the more the client forgets the effort that was involved in the case. Sometimes attorneys make it look so easy that clients even think they could have done the work themselves better and for less money. You're just doing your job too well. And then they look at the bill and think, well, that was so easy, it shouldn't cost this much. In fact, some insurance companies that provide malpractice insurance to their clients have clauses that will either prohibit or strongly discourage the law firms they represent from sending clients to court to collect on an outstanding bill. And that's because that a large portion of those clients are then more likely to simply file a malpractice lawsuit than they are to pay those fees. So now you're not just not getting your fees, you're also getting sued for that. So that's another reason why it's important to make sure those bills get out on time. So what are some of the strategies we can use? The firms that I find that are most successful in getting bills out the door are firms that set a schedule and keep it. Okay, and sometimes I know it's really tough. I hear a lot of firms complaining about that. So the first thing is set the schedule. Many of those firms that have the ability to get their bills out the door within 5 business days are doing that by requiring that the time be entered by 10 a.m. on the first day of the month. They actually have the requirement, time is supposed to be entered on 10 a.m. each day. Okay, but at the very latest, it has to be entered by 10 a.m. at the first day of the month. And then they run a recap of hours report, which we saw earlier, that shows which hours are on which day, handed out to each of the attorneys, and those attorneys have until noon to make up anything that was not included on those reports. So if they maybe missed a day, they can look at that and say, oh, well, I forgot to bill for this, and go in and get that bill in. Okay. Then they run those pre-bills at noon, have them out at 2 o'clock, and then those pre-bills have to be returned within 1 business day so that the bills can be corrected. And then since there's less staff correcting them, you might have 2 or 3 days for that, but then those bills get out the door in a very short time. Now, in addition to setting the schedule, you have to make staff aware of that schedule that you create. And you can use software tools that are available to make that job easier too. For example, you can use a tool like in your practice management or calendaring system to schedule deadlines. Here you're seeing something that we call a counterplan template in Practice Master, which calculates deadlines, and it can calculate around holidays, and it can calculate around weekends, and it will put that information in the calendar so that the entire staff knows when their work needs to be done. So here we're going to look at it in the calendar view. Now this is just a weekly view, but you can see all of the entries where the firm is supposed to have that time in. So if you look down here, you can see that first business day of the month, July 1st, when the time has to be entered, printing the pre-bills, routing the pre-bills, where the reviews are done and you need to start on the corrections. So everybody needs to know when those deadlines are. But just setting those deadlines may not be enough. You have to have consequences in place or the deadlines will not work. Some of the successful consequences that I've seen are fines. Now, obviously, the attorneys have to agree to that, but generally most law firms are a partnership, and so when they get together, they make that decision, and everybody then pays that fine if they don't have their time in. However, that fine can't just be rolled back into the firm and then be part of the attorney bonuses at the end of the year. You want to do something fun, like have a staff luncheon or have a staff party or something like that with all of those fines that come in. So that's one way that you can do it. Another way that I've seen it happen is firms keep the deadlines, and if the time's not in, it simply doesn't make it on the bill. So then they're running the bills, and maybe attorney Bob is over here in the corner and doesn't have his time in, so his bill is going out the door, and if there's other work on it that another attorney worked on it, the bill is going out the door and his time's not on it. So then next month when the bill goes out for that client, they see attorney Bob's time for last month, but the other attorneys that worked on the case had already billed their stuff, so they're really thinking that that attorney is maybe not the best attorney to be working on their files. Okay. Some firms make receipts a part of their pay structure. So attorneys who get their bills out faster will get that money back in the door and get their performance bonuses more quickly. If you're doing a pay by week, the sooner those bills get out the door, the sooner that money comes in. Or even if you pay monthly, if it's taking you 2 and 3 months to get your bills out, you certainly are going to take longer to get that money in. So that's another method that I've seen successful in some firms. Another way to make it easy to get the bills out the door is to ensure that the billing staff has their tools to make their job easier. For example, here we have a tool that you can see called Report Suites. What this means is I can define criteria for several different types of statements and then run all the pre-bills at once. So I might have one attorney that likes to have all of their pre-bills, even clients that are on hold, even clients that are billed quarterly but aren't going to be billed this month. They might want to see others, but another attorney only wants to see the stuff that should be going out this month. I can set each of those criteria up separately and then just run it all at once. So bills are just a couple clicks away. Now, some of the other benefits to this is the billing person, who in a lot of firms does not get to take lunch when the bills are due to go out or pre-bills are due to go out, can set this up to run, go out and get lunch, come back, and they're printed, and then they just need to distribute bills. Likewise, if that person is out of the office, instead of having this big, thick binder with all these instructions, I've seen 20-page instructions to run pre-bills, all you have to do is 4 or 5 steps. Click on the report suite, select the suite, click OK, select your printer, click OK, pick them up. So very easy to get those out the door. Another way to get those out the door fast is to email those statements. In tabs 3, clients can be configured to receive bills by mail, by email, or both. You simply run the statements as normal and then go into the email statements program, review them, and then click the send button. Then they're on their way. I have a client, Rachel, who used to spend 2 days getting hundreds of bills out the door. So she does billing for a lot of different law firms, and she switched all of her firms and said everybody has to get their bills by email. And now it takes less than an hour to get those bills out the door. Very efficient for that firm. Some people prefer to work one-on-one, and that's okay too. If you prefer a little individual control, you can pull up each statement one at a time to verify the information and simply click the send button on that email. I had another client in town who was reluctant, the firm that is, was reluctant to switch to email bills a few years ago. Their billing person was pretty strong about that though, and eventually got them to try it, and they're very happy that they did. A statement that I heard from Tracy was that the payments come in faster. Of course, that means that so do the questions, but it's fresher in our minds, and then we can respond to them better and more efficiently because it hasn't been a week since we sent those bills out the door. One of the things I like about this individual email is also the ability that I can optionally pull in information from the client's bill so they know what to pay. I'm someone who does a lot of my banking online. I'm pretty much a computer geek here. And I quickly will highlight this amount when I have something to pay, and I will go and I will pop it into my bill pay program right away the day I get the email. So I'm going to get that payment out the door fast. My bills that come in the mail, the snail mail as it's often called, I will wait until the end of the week or maybe the end of the next week, and if I'm really busy, maybe the week after that, before I get those bills out the door. And so for me, it's easier for me to get my payment out, and I know that's the case for others too, because then they can get those payments out the door. And again, this is optional information, so you don't have to include that on your bills. Finally, the last mistake that we're going to talk about today is attorneys who avoid their accounts receivables. AR happens no matter what you do, unless you're getting all your payments up front. Even when you get the bills right out the door, there are clients that are going to put off paying as long as possible. Whether it's due to a temporary shortage of funds, or maybe it's an oversight on behalf of the client, or maybe your client, like me, just sticks it someplace and then they lose it when they're cleaning house and they need to get it out of the way. There are ways that we can reduce that pain of the AR. As I mentioned, some people get their payments in advance. So billing those clients in advance is one of the ways you can avoid AR, especially if you practice a form of law where clients become more reluctant at the end of the case, and then those initial deadlines are not as critical. If you have something where you have a deadline, you have to make sure you meet that deadline so that you're not hurting your client. However, if you don't have a deadline, you can certainly put that off until you get that money up front. Having the money up front is a good indication that the client is capable of paying for your services. Of course, you want to ensure that the money you receive is properly managed in that IOLTA account. The IOLTA is the name for the national program. I know each state might have their different names for it, like NELTAF and COLTAF and things like that. Good software like Tabs 3 Trust Accounting will track the individual account balances as well as the balance of your combined IOLTA account, so you don't have to worry about that commingling of funds. You can keep track of that bank account balance very easily by simply tracking the work that you do for each of those individual matters. So you only have to do things once. If your clients don't pay in advance, you will want to track how much they owe and follow up on those past due amounts. Before I started working with Tabs 3 20 years ago, I used to work for a collection company. Identifying clients who have past due amounts and following up with them is critical when you're following up and when you're collecting on things, as well as keeping track of the communication that you've had. And the more delinquent a client gets, the more you need to follow up with them. One of my favorite ways of tracking past due amounts is using the Tabs 3 collections report. The settings that you see here are what I like to use for what I call seriously delinquent accounts. These people need to be followed up with probably a couple times a week by the time they get to this point. So that's balances more than 4 months old with 90 days since the last payment. So I'm going to show you some of my favorite tips, and this time we're just going to go actually out to the software. So we're going to run that collections report, and I have it right here on my main screen. And I simply load my report and pull up the seriously delinquent accounts and hit OK. Now you can see I've got my settings for the 120 days past due and 90 days since the last payment. I simply hit OK and then run the report. Now I'm going to preview it, and actually I probably would preview it when following up with it, and you'll see why in a moment. So when I'm looking at this report, there's a lot of things that I love about it. First of all, I can see the full history, the report of the statements that have been sent, and how much is due on each statement. Even where I have received a partial payment, I can see that as well. So I know that they're not completely somebody that has never paid anything. I can see that they were working on things. I can see that I still have work yet to be billed. I can see the payments that they have made and the age between those, as well as all of the contact information so I can communicate with that individual. Now another thing, and again it's not something that I have listed, is this write-offs. With the write-offs, I can see if I have written off a portion of balance. Something that I see attorneys do occasionally is to get a client to pay, they'll offer to write off as much as 10% of the bill. And that's great. So when the client's payment comes in, for 90% of the bill, they write off 10%. But you know what happens when the client gets more bills after that? The client, if they get behind, once they start getting behind, they're going to think, well, they wrote it off last time. Maybe I'll just not pay it. Maybe they'll write it off again. And so then hopefully you'll write it off by 10%. You might as well write it off by 10% right when you start if you're going to do that. So here I can see what I've done and see if there's a write-off out there so that I know I'm not going to make that adjustment again in order to get the client to pay, because there's no reason that I need to do that. Now, another favorite feature of this is I like to come out here and I like to drill down. So when you see that, you can see I hover over it, I drill down to the client. And we have a place called Billing Notes and Instructions. And out here, I can type something. And I'm just going to put in my entire history with a quick macro that I created just for this webinar. And so here you can see all of the history. And I recommend going in, and every time you make communication with that client, record it. If you called and left a message, record it. If you called and there was no answer, typically they're either on the phone or they've got their phone set off the hook so that it'll just keep ringing and ringing, then record that. So then when you're talking with the client later on, you can say something like, I spoke with your secretary, so of course you should have heard the fact that your balance was past due. And that gives the client the ability to say, well, if maybe the secretary didn't pass that information on, that gives them an opportunity to look for that missing information in their system to go out and see, well, maybe they thought they were paying and they weren't. You might have an employee theft case out there or something like that. So you really have that communication there. Plus, if you do need to send to collections, you will need to prove your due diligence in contacting your client. Now, another thing I like about this is when I come back to this report, I can simply hit the refresh button and I can see that history on the report. So the next time I'm calling and I'm making a collections call, I can see everything that's gone on in the past. So I can see here on June 2nd, I called and made an agreement that we would receive 1/2 of the past due amount within the next 14 days. It's more than 14 days later and I haven't received that. So now I've got another reason to call and follow up and say, hey, you didn't keep your part of the agreement. We're not doing any more work, or whatever the case may be that you can do back in your system. Of course, once you get that client on the phone to discuss their past due amounts, you want to make it easy for your clients to pay. When you're working with a client and their account is delinquent, accepting credit cards is one of the best ways to help them get caught up. Of course, you might accept them outside of the delinquency too, but definitely when you're making collection calls, having that credit card information or having the ability to type in check information is just an easy way to get that information and get those bills paid. When entering a payment into tabs 3, if you're set up with a TSYS merchant account, you can simply enter the credit card information or even use a card swiper to collect that information. As soon as you press submit, that information is sent to TSYS, which is the credit card processor that we work with, and then a response is returned practically immediately, letting you know that the payment was accepted. So I put on here it's secure and fast. If you're concerned about security because you heard about things like Target getting hit and Home Depot, those are big businesses and they couldn't protect their clients' data, you don't have to worry because this information is not stored. It's not stored in your computer. It's only kept in memory long enough so that we can submit that information to the credit card processor and it's gone as soon as we receive that confirmation. So now that information is not available for someone to steal from your office. It's out of the office. Additionally, firms are concerned that maybe they're doing bankruptcy as one of their areas of law and they can't accept that as credit card. Keep in mind you can still accept credit cards from family members or friends that might be willing to assist your client. You don't have to be your client's baker. Credit card companies are better equipped to handle the credit situations you may come up with. So if you can get that information on credit card, the client can take and they can pay that off over the time. So it helps the client and it helps you. You get your money right away. The client gets regular payments that are a little bit easier for them to handle. As a side note, if you're doing retainers, tabs 3 Trust Accounting also has the ability to accept credit card payments into your IOLTA account so that even retainer payments are easy. If you have a credit card company and you're thinking about that, you want to look for certain features. For example, money from your client can be deposited in the IOLTA account and the costs associated with those credit cards. So that might be chargebacks, that might be the just credit card costs. Usually it's right around 3% of the credit cards. Actually 1 point something up to 3%. 3% is kind of at the high end. That will be taken out, and for TSYS, it's taken out once a month, not with every transaction. But that will be taken out of the firm's operating account so that you can meet your state's bar regulations. Keep in mind that each state bar is different, and we're going off the information that we know that would meet all of your regulations. You still want to check with your state bar if you're going to do that. So there you have it. You can now avoid the most common mistakes that attorneys make. So to review that, if your problem is inaccurate timekeeping, you can enter time as you work, and an easy way to do that is to use a timer. Additionally, you can use software tools such as your macros to make data entry easier, your convert to fees, and then you don't have to duplicate the effort, and tabs reconnect when you're out of the office. If you need to find your missing time, you can do that using reports in your software like the Recap of Hours report in tab 3. You can view your calendar and other programs that track your time, such as the visual timer display in Practice Master, or third-party programs like iTimekeep or Chrometa. To help keep your invoicing on time, you first need to set up a schedule and then be sure to let everybody know by putting that in the firm's calendar. Use tools like the report suites to make those tasks faster and get those bills out the door fast by emailing statements. And then finally, avoid your accounts receivable, or if your problem is avoiding accounts receivable, you can prevent clients from getting behind in the first place by using a retainer, and you can use an evergreen retainer too on that so that you can bill them for that retainer amount. If you say to keep a certain amount in there, you can certainly do something like that so you're not maybe billing the whole part out front, but at least keeping a balance in there. For clients that do get behind, be sure to regularly track that accounts receivable using efficient reports, and don't forget to track those collection calls. And then finally, when you have the client on the phone, make it easier to get paid by accepting those credit cards. So now that you know the top mistakes that attorneys make and how you can avoid making them, I want to thank you for coming out here and listening to me and hopefully learning a little bit about the software, as well as learning what you can do to avoid those mistakes. If you have questions on tabs 3, you can visit us at tabs3.com on the web or contact our office at 402-419-2200.